tonight's Insights, a special Election 2018 preview. In November, the people of Hawaii will elect a governor, members of our congressional team, new mayors for the counties of Maui and Kaua, new county council members, and state lawmakers. Will this be the year Hawaii residents show up, or will we continue to post the lowest voter turnout in the country? Join this Election 2018 preview. Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of Insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff with Hawaii News Now. The 2018 election season kicks into full gear in less than a month. June 5th is the deadline for candidates to file papers to run for office. Can Governor David Ige advance past challengers Colleen Hanabusa and Clayton He in the Democratic primary for a shot at a second term in office? We'll also look at the Republican primary, which features a veteran candidate versus a fast-rising leader from the state house. Hanabusa's bid for governor creates a wide-open race in the 1st Congressional District with at least 5 high-profile Democrats running. The lieutenant governor's race also features 5 well-known politicians. New mayors will be elected in 2 neighbor island counties, Maui and Kauai. How will all of that affect the makeup and perhaps the power structure in the state legislature? Voters will decide if they want a state to tax investment properties, to raise money for education, and whether to hold a constitutional convention. And perhaps the most important question of all, will anyone show up to vote? We will have a lot to talk about, and we look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email, call, or tweet your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and at PBS Hawaii Facebook page. Now to our guests. Colin Moore is Associate Professor of Political Science and Director of the Public Policy Center at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Chad Blair is the political columnist at Honolulu Civil Beat. Catherine Cruz is a producer and host of The Conversation at Hawaii Public Radio. Before that, she was a longtime reporter and colleague of mine at KITV. And Brian Perry is city editor at the Maui News and has been covering politics in Maui County for many years. Let's start off with the marquee race, the governor's race that will put the incumbent David Ige up against Colleen Hanabusa and former Senator Clayton He. Now, Colin Moore, I'll let you start off. How do you handicap things at this stage?
Well, I mean, we have just really one poll to go on, and it shows that David Ige is in deep trouble. I mean, he's 20 points behind Colleen Hanabusa. And really, I mean, what I want to emphasize is he shouldn't be in this position. Hawaii recorded one of the lowest unemployment records ever in the United States. He's a Democratic incumbent running in a Democratic state. He should be doing much, much, much better. And so it's going to be hard for him to make that out because voters have clearly decided they're not interested in what he's selling. And I think, you know, this race will mainly be about leadership, and that's what Colleen Hanabusa is emphasizing. The question for Clayton He is, what role does he play? I mean, is he a spoiler? Who does he take votes from? And I think a lot of folks think that he actually does benefit David Ige, that some folks might split their votes who are against Ige between he and Hanabusa.
Chad, how do you see it?
Well, Civil Beat will have its own poll coming out later this month. I don't have any numbers yet, but certainly that's created an expectation over that campaign. And you know, everyone keeps on saying it's because of the false missile alert that David Ige is in trouble right now. And certainly he's taking a lot of blame for that. But it is interesting, in the last couple of weeks, you've seen him dealing with other disasters. In this case, not man-made, but 2 natural disasters, the flooding on Kauai, as well as the situation in Puna with the lava. And he's in the helicopter. He's photographed with Mayor Harry Kim and others, and he appears to have taken a much stronger leadership role. Is it enough to have him rebound from those numbers? I don't know, but clearly someone has remembered his Twitter account password, and they're tweeting out positive things about what they perceive as the governor's role.
Catherine, as a reporter, you've got to know all of these folks. What do you think their strengths and weaknesses are going into a campaign like this?
At this point, I'm not ready to write Ige off. I think, he's obviously he's in a situation where everybody's ganging up on him because of the support with the leadership in the House and the Senate, backing Colleen. And he's also aligned with Mayor Caldwell, and you've got the politics there where the leadership in the state House and the Senate not real big fans. Mm-hmm. So we've seen that in many ways over the last couple of sessions.
Now, Brian Perry for the Maui News. How's the governor's race playing out on Maui, do you think?
Well, I'm hearing quite a bit of diverse opinions about it. On the one side, you have people saying, well, he's not Mr. Excitement, but he's an engineer, he's careful, he's methodical, he's doing a pretty good job. On the other end, I'm hearing quite a bit of anger out there. And in fact, one man I talked to who was involved in business said that his opinion is that he's a weak governor who has abdicated his authority to a kitchen cabinet of advisors with special interests.
Chad, do you think that that's a perception? Do you see a division among like the business community versus the civil society community, liberals? I mean, how does that play out?
I mean, I think that really everyone has been critical of Ige. I don't see that there's a clear divide between the business folks and normal folks. I mean, everyone complains about leadership. And that's interesting because when you ask people, what is it that David Ige did that you dislike so much, very few people can actually put their finger on it, can name a specific policy. But they all feel like he's not being decisive. There's a lot of uncertainty. I mean, certainly the business community fears uncertainty more than almost anything else. And that's how Colleen Hanabusa has pitched her campaign. And I think that's a smart thing to do. I think actually that David Ige is not really generating the right kind of campaign narrative. You see him emphasizing his local roots, saying he's doing the right thing in the right way. Nobody questions that David Ige is an honest, well-meaning person. But what he needs to emphasize is, the actual policy accomplishments he has, which are many, and try to present himself as a decisive leader. And actually, as Chad mentioned, some of these natural disasters may give him an opportunity to showcase his leadership.
And Colin's right, he does have some accomplishments. The governor himself will admit, I'm not the best communicator, I need to get my message out. But listen, those classrooms have been cooled with air conditioning, with the help from the legislature, of course. He can point to the homeless numbers having gone down 10%. Absolutely. I mean, that's been under his watch. He needs to get that out more and communicate. But something real interesting happened in the middle of session. The top leaders in the House and Senate, and this is really the core of David Ige's problem. Senate President Kochi, House Speaker Scott Saiki, the leaders of the money committees, holding a fundraiser for Colleen Hanabusa right smack dab in the middle of session when they're dealing with the budget, dealing with the governor's own agenda. That clearly shows his lack of support in the body, where he is at the fifth floor at the Capitol, after all.
Catherine, you mentioned that too, that the unified legislative leadership, and they did things to make him look bad as best they could.
There's a lot of this one-upmanship you see.
He wasn't included in some of the last-minute decisions at all, and they would call press conferences and he wouldn't be there. But what do you think is going on? What do you think? Where do you think that opinion comes from? Why are they so against him?
I'm not sure. I mean, I know I heard a lot last session when they were dealing with the Airbnb issue, and the lawmakers were frustrated because they passed something, the governor rejected it, and then they kept saying, well, what does the governor want us to do? And I heard that over and over again in those hearings, And so, this year that didn't pass. They couldn't, get along.
I just heard from a source that what really torqued off the what he called the downtown Honolulu power clique was the governor's opposition to the NextEra Hawaiian Electric deal. And I'm just curious if you've heard anything along those lines.
Well, I'll chime in there. We've reported, Nathan Eagle, our reporter, that NextEra, even though it's no longer in contention to take over Hawaiian Electric, it's in Florida. Guess who they are donating to? They're giving money, their top executives, to Colleen Hanabusa. And one wonders whether there might not be another attempt there at the PUC.
Colin, let me throw this at you. Colleen Hanabusa has very deep ties to the banking industry, very deep ties to labor unions. Yes. We talked about the relationship with the big utilities. Walter Dodds is a big backer. Do you think that's something that could be a weakness for her, or do you think that's a bulwark that's unbeatable?
Well, I think it depends on how David Ige runs his campaign. I actually think the leadership in the legislature and the money committees being against him, he could use that to his advantage. In fact, the best I've seen David Ige actually is going after the House and Senate leadership and the money committees. I mean, saying this fundraiser was inappropriate. You saw a little fire and anger, and he could try to convince voters that, look, I'm the only person, stopping, controlling the legislature. I'm your check. I believe in honest government. Colleen Hanabusa is in with all these folks. Whether or not that's fair or not, voters can decide. But I think he could position himself a bit as, outside this downtown clique, and I think he should.
Let me throw out one thing. We haven't talked much about Clayton He got 80,000 votes in the race when Ige and Abercrombie were running against each other. As I recall, it was one. And 80,000 votes is a fair amount of votes in a Democratic primary. Do anybody here think that he could actually surprise people?
I'll say two things about Senator. He has never been able to advance to higher office from the state Senate. He was on OHA, of course, for a while, but he has run previously for lieutenant governor. He's run previously for Congress, has not succeeded. What he's doing that I think is interesting is he's actually come out with some positions that are pretty clear. He is against rail. He says stop it at Middle Street. He wants to legalize recreational marijuana. There are other kinds of positions. Gambling, yeah, is a possibility. You don't hear anybody else talking about these things, and that's pretty remarkable. And frankly, those positions have a lot of support among a lot of people. So I think he does have that going for him, but for now, he's still a spoiler. We'll have to see what the latest numbers are on his campaign.
Okay, last question that I'd like to throw out is that, as a longtime analyst myself of politics, one of the things I noticed in this race, there is no Caucasian candidate. And there is a potential Caucasian candidate out there. What do you think? Is there a possibility of a wild card getting thrown in here at the last minute? We've still got, 3 or 4 weeks before the filing deadline.
Well, and you're asking 3 white males and a woman of color. Certainly there are 2 names out there, prominent white male politicians, strong name recognition. One of them is Kirk Caldwell. There has been talk that the mayor may jump into a race, perhaps the first congressional. I don't know whether that's true or not. Ed Case is the other, former congressman. He might run for CD1, which is actually, he used to be in CD2, and if you run for CD1, you can do that. Maybe governor, we don't know. I'll tell you, time is running out. The deadline might be June 5th, but if they want to raise money and get out there, they better declare soon.
Okay, so really quickly, though, I want to mention that there are other candidates in these races that we are not talking about much tonight. If folks at home want to know more about other candidates that may have filed or plan to file, you can go to the State Elections Division and you can learn all about them from the contact information that you'll find there. Talking now about the governor of the Republican primary. Right now, 2 main candidates have emerged. John Carroll, former state senator, sort of a perennial candidate. He's run a number of times. He doesn't tend to get very well financed. And Andrea Tupola, a real sort of rising star. Chad, why did you handicap this one first?
Well, this is really quite a contrast. John Carroll is more than perennial. He has ran a number of times and not been able to win office, Senate, governor, other races too. Tupola, in many ways, is exactly what the Republican Party needs. Someone who's bright, who's intelligent, who's experienced, who has charisma, and frankly, who is a woman of color and who wants to diversify her party, represent really the diversity of this island. And I think she's really quite a distinct figure, but she's going up against name recognition. Not a whole lot of people know her. She's only been in the legislature a few years, even though she's the minority leader. Carroll, a lot of people may just pick John Carroll, particularly Republicans, because they recognize the name on the ballot.
Yeah, I agree with that too. Tupola is a rising star, but I just thought it was interesting because last session, I know when Marcus Oshiro departed, she thanked him because she said that he helped her learn how to read bills and the budget. And so that was very interesting because, he was a Democrat and she's a Republican. But yeah, she is a rising star, whether she can pull it out.
How does the troubles in the Republican Party affect her, Colin?
Well, they certainly have. I mean, as folks at home might know, she has a temporary restraining order out on one of the leaders of the Republican splinter faction. And I think this is the problem with the Hawaii Republican Party. They eat their own. I mean, we've seen really talented legislators like Beth Fukumoto leave. And there is this ideological purity test that they seem to want to apply, or at least certain segments of them, and others see someone like Andrea Tupola as really their hope. But they're not going to ever see any kind of success if they can't do that. But to be fair, they're really dragged down, I think, by the vision that a lot of people have of a very conservative mainland Republican Party. I think a lot of local folks are scared of what people call Trumpism, and it's tough to position themselves as a distinct brand from that.
One thing too is a campaign like this is a statewide campaign, and you have to. One of the things they say, oh, she's well known, she gets a lot of free media, but I'm wondering, Brian, do people even know much about these 2 candidates on Maui? Do you get any impression that people know who these candidates even are?
No.
Yeah. So, are they campaigning there? Have you seen anything?
I haven't seen anything.
Yeah.
But I don't go to all parts of the island, but I haven't seen anything.
Yeah, and so that in and of itself, might be able to win a Republican primary, but that's a really big challenge after that. Any other comments on the Republican?
You got to bring up Trump again, which Colin mentioned. I was at their convention, the Republican Party, this last weekend, and as you walked into the Ko'olau ballroom, there was actually a cardboard cutout of the president. And some people were posing with photos, with the cardboard cutout, and some people were not. I can tell you that from the podium, the general message was, Trump is winning, we're doing well, you'll be surprised during the midterms, he will do very good, but there's this undercurrent of people that never have bought into Trump being the favored candidate here. Remember, out of all the states, Trump did the least well here in Hawaii against Hillary Clinton.
Okay, so now the most baffling race of all to me, Lieutenant Governor for the Democratic
Everyone
primary
wants this job.
It's like 5 very well-known, or to me well-known, and maybe they're not well-known elsewhere, State Senator Josh Green, State Senator Jill Takuda, Kauai Mayor Bernard Cavallo, former school board member Kim Koko Iamoto, who's had one of the larger presences on television already, and State Senator Will Espero. Catherine, what do you make of this? Why do people could have long careers if they stayed where they are, throwing themselves out in a statewide race?
Because they're looking ahead for the governor's race. You know, you had people go into that position and move on to other things. Ben Cayetano did it. He was lieutenant governor. He became governor. So yeah, it's a way to get in there. I was really intrigued because I know the polls initially had Green, I think, ahead, and I went and looked at his filings, and he had like 10 fundraisers so far this year. Interesting.
Money's going to make a big difference. I'm curious, Brian, on Maui. You know, it was the departure of Shan Tsutsui that created this vacuum that everyone is being pulled into. What's the talk on Maui about Shan Tsutsui? I mean,
we're just wondering why he did what he did. I think that people there appreciate that he's a family man, and that it's pretty clear that he was never really happy being a lieutenant governor and having to be drawn so far away from his family. So, and from what I know of Shan and talking with him, it was a family decision.
What do you think, Colin Moore, it's going to take to win this with this real mixed bag of candidates?
It's going to take money, and it's going to take a lot of advertising. I mean, this is not a race people follow very closely. I mean, we know who a lot of these folks are, and I'm sure that a lot of people know who Jill Takuda, Bernard Carvalho, Josh Green are. But this isn't really about issues. It's sort of a campaign about name recognition. And, you know, Jill Takuda has one big advantage, which is that Mazie Hirono is campaigning for and supports her heavily. That certainly will help. Josh Green, I believe, still has the most money, or he's a very strong fundraiser. Our Carvalho, I think, has been, has a great presence. You know, I think his Twitter hashtag is Think Big. He's a former NFL player, popular mayor. He's not been so successful with fundraising, but I think if he could improve that, he is a sort of candidate I think a lot of folks would like to vote for.
What's your take on this one?
It's wide open.
Yeah.
The poll that we saw a couple months ago in the Star Advertiser showed a whole lot of people did not know who they would vote for. I don't think the leading candidates had more than 15, 16, 70%. And there's a reason why Kim Koko Iamoto is spending her money on ads is to get her name recognition up. And that's what it's going to come down to. I will add one thing, and it's not just governor. It used to be that any lieutenant governor became governor, and then that changed. But we've had 2 lieutenant governors, Brian Schatz and Mazie Hirono, go on to the U.S. Senate. Right. So it is a stepping stone.
Let me read a couple of quick comments. They're starting to come in now, and some of them will be about things we've already talked about. That's fine. We want to encourage our viewers to call us. In defense of Governor Ige, Mike from Molokai says Governor Ige is of Asian descent and not outspoken. Since this is his culture, he shouldn't be criticized for this quality. Quiet but effective.
Sure, just like Governor Ariyoshi, although I'm not sure that's working for him. I mean, voters clearly don't see that, or at least the voters who are responding to the poll we saw don't seem to be responding to that type
Daryl,
of...
could I wade into this?
Sure.
Former Governor John Waihee came to Maui and spoke to a Nisei veteran group, and I spoke to him later about the governor's race, and he's supporting Governor Ige. And he said that as a leader in the Democratic Party, that we shouldn't change horses in midstream, and that unless Governor Ige is doing something egregiously bad, then they should stick with him. Also, note that
He hasn't screwed up bad enough to unelect him, and that's the main reason.
No.
And I'm not arguing with you, but it's just an interesting point. It's like, okay, can we get, like Colin is saying, can we get something on the table that people can
He
grasp?
also pointed out that he supported Abercrombie when Ige was running.
And that means, I mean, we're
That's a
seeing
track
something
record.
fascinating in Hawaii politics, where it's very possible we're going to have 2 incumbent governors lose.
Right. Another caller and her friends are mad at Hanabusa for not staying in Congress where she is needed. hence caller will not vote for Hanabusa. Can you see a campaign by Ige that actually goes after her for this ambition, kind of like Ed Case did?
Well, I'll just confess, I've written about that Colleen Hanabusa can't seem to sit still. Remember, she ran for the U.S. Senate against Brian Schatz a couple of years ago. And one legacy, along with labor, and then her other record is the Dan Inouye factor. I think that's still something that's very significant, and that touches into the Japanese American vote as well. I do think sometimes it looks like Colleen is purely looking on an ambition. She says that's not the case. It's about leadership and vision. I care for Hawaii. But clearly from that viewer's point of view, it looks like she can't sit still.
Governor Waihee did, I think, make a point. He had said that he lamented that Colleen should not have left D.C., that she would be more effective. And,
I mean, there's a chance the House, very good chance, the House is going to flip to Democrats, that Nancy Pelosi, who's close to Colleen Hanabusa, they know each other well, could be in power again.
So that was the point that he made was, maybe if I had known earlier, I might have supported Colleen before David jumped in the race. But he just lamented her leaving D.C.
And Waihee also was worried about the splintering of the Democratic Party.
Speaking of the splintered Democratic Party and the U.S. House, here's 5 candidates running for 1st Congressional District Democratic primary. Doug Chin, currently the Lieutenant Governor, former Attorney General. Donna Kim, longtime state senator. Kaniela Ing from Maui, or so they say.
No?
Not entirely
Rumor
sure.
has it.
Ernie Martin, council chair, and Beth Fukumoto, former Republican. Colin, why don't you take the first shot at this one?
Well, I mean, I think so Ernie Martin's done pretty well on fundraising, but I think most people assume that this is really a race between Doug Chin and Donna Kim. Doug Chin, of course, is very well known. He has a great story to tell for this race. He's the one who stood up to Trump. He famously, Hawaii was part of Hawaii v. Trump, which just was heard in front of the Supreme Court about the immigration ban. And so I think he can say, I'm the one who stood up to Trump. You need me in the Congress. Donna Kim is very well known. That is mainly a good thing because I think she's respected as someone who holds bureaucrats, makes them accountable, really is kind of this hard-charging legislator. But I think her negatives are a bit higher. I mean, interestingly enough, this is the first race that Doug Chin has ever won. I mean, he's been Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor. Ever run. Yeah. Ever run. And so I think he's struggled a bit with his campaign.
Well, speaking of struggling, and you folks are very familiar with Kaniela Ing, he kind of stumbled out of the box, but he also came out with some pretty vigorous messaging. The Dan Inouye thing that he brought up, and also his going after Doug Chin on his former pastor role, right? What do you think how do you see Kaniela Ing doing? I mean, how is he regarded on Maui, and do you expect that he might do better than some people think?
It's hard to say. He's of that group. He's the only one that I know of. He's had his troubles with campaign spending reporting, and also there was an incident where he had some pullover and he didn't have some insurance, and then didn't make a court date or something like that. So he's a South Maui House member, and I don't know.
One thing that you mentioned that when we were talking earlier is how progressive Maui has become.
Right.
And where do you see that coming from?
It comes from different places, and South Maui is one of them. There's an area called Maui Meadows that has some progressive voters there that I think supported him quite strongly. The other thing that's activated the progressive people on Maui was the GMO vote back in 2014, and that has really stirred them up. And then in 2016, they supported they called the Ohana Coalition, and four members of the Ohana Coalition were elected to county council seats in 2016. So it's going to be interesting to see where that's going to go.
I recall covering Donna Kim when she started at the city council, and it was during the recall of the councilmen who Patsy Mink led the charge because they changed parties in the middle of the stream. And so it's interesting to have Fukumoto in this
party
mix
changer
as well, because there's so many lawmakers that we saw over the past couple of years that have switched parties.
Well, Brian mentioned the progressive nature. I mean, everybody is going left in this people who were against same-sex marriage are suddenly for it. People who, it seems like this is a pretty progressive group. Do you see any division or any campaigning to try and distinguish themselves as being not quite as progressive? Chad, what do you think of that?
I think progressive is the way to go. A couple of things. Carnelian does not live on Oahu. CD1 is urban Honolulu. There's no law in Hawaii. You can run for either seat depending on where you live, but I think that is hurting his campaign, not having as much name recognition here on Oahu. Kim was very much against same-sex marriage. The pastor of which he spoke about, Doug Chin, there is a recording of him expressing his strong views for Jesus Christ and some concerns about same-sex marriage. He says he's evolved, Kim as well. I think it's a factor. With Fukumoto, this is her first race as a Democrat, mind you. She's the former House Minority Leader, a Republican, and yet her claim to fame, rightly so, is that she stood up to Trump, that she left the party because Trump is not the person that she can support.
I want to go back very briefly to the Lieutenant Governor's race because I think that there's a good point that this caller is making. Caller appreciates Lieutenant Governor candidates with diversity, how likely it is that another neighbor island candidate will win. Interesting. I mean, do voters maybe make that distinction? I'd like to have some diversity. And is there any preference for neighbor island people? Guys, we got, only just two, we got two neighbor island candidates in that race for lieutenant governor.
It's difficult for a neighbor island candidate to win governor or lieutenant governor. There is some history. Linda Lingle, of course, from Maui. She lost the first time, won the second time. The problem is name recognition. You just don't have that sufficient base because Oahu is nearly 1 million people.
Okay. Just moving right along, isn't it? Hopefully the election will be as exciting as this show, right? So we are getting some good calls, and a couple of things we're going to move on to, too. But voter turnout. I mean, Colin, I'll let you start with this one. There's a lot of stuff going on in this election. Do you think it will actually move the needle on voter turnout?
I do. I actually think voter turnout might be a bit better, not because so much of what is going on here, but because of all of the attention in the press on national issues. I think there's just a lot of angry progressives and angry Democrats who, I mean, in the primary, obviously, they're not going to be voting on these national issues, but I think that this has taken folks who don't always engage in politics. They're paying a lot more attention, and I think that might tick our voter turnout up a bit. I don't think it's going to be some dramatic difference, but I actually do think that the national political scene is what drives a lot of political attention.
Chad,
well, as you also know, midterm elections, the vote turnout
that's true.
drops, and even in Hawaii, when we had Barack Obama, native son, on the ballot, it still dropped as well. I'm hopeful. I'm not predicting great numbers. I will certainly celebrate if it goes up from, 40%?
Yeah.
Is that the mark right now?
To 41%. Yeah, that's what we're talking
about. Last in the
Modest,
nation, I think.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I wish I had better news to share on that one, but I remain cynical about it, frankly.
Catherine, at the legislature this year, there was an effort to bring mail-in voting.
Right.
They ended up cutting it down to like nothing.
A test project on Kauai.
In 2 years.
Right. And I know they've tried different things, on the neighborhood board level. You can go online, and they were experimenting with that. But I think people were disappointed that they didn't maybe just roll something out to try and shake this apathy and get people out to the
Do you think institutionally our legislature doesn't want high voter turnout?
Yes. Yes. That bill died the last 3 sessions in a row. Made it to conference committee, I think twice, and it was the full state pilot. Not a pilot. I mean, we were going to have absentee ballot. That's the trend. Everyone, more and more, not everyone, but the numbers are clear that people are voting from home. They don't want to go wait in line. They're busy. They're working, and it has shown elsewhere in some states that it actually drives up turnout. But I wondered, this is again my cynicism, did the people in the legislature worry that more people might turn out and therefore impact their own election?
But what's your read on people? Are people excited? Maui's not too bad for voting, right? Or what's their history?
I think that last time we had about 54 or 56% turnout. And part of that, I think, was because of the GMO activating all these voters. And then I think that in this coming election year, there will be a good voter turnout because of what's at stake on Maui. There will be a new mayor, and then there's at least 4 open council seats. And if the ruling majority of the council, if they don't activate their people, they could very well lose the majority of the council. So there's a lot at stake.
That's a good point. We can move to that. Neighbor island races, Maui is always exciting. The politicians there are a little different from the other islands. What do you see happening, guys, with the Maui mayor?
Well, and I would defer to Brian, being his expertise, but I think we do know the name of Mike Victorino, Don Guzman, correct me if I'm wrong, Ellie Cochran, I think would have to be the contender. Would you say those are the three primarily?
Those are the three contenders. In fact, since 1990, they're all council members or former council members, and since 1990, the voters have only put former council members into the mayor's office. So it's like a learning ground for county government. And frankly, the county government is so difficult to handle. I don't know how someone could go in there cold and manage a $700 million a year operation.
Colin, one thing about Maui that always struck me, Linda Lingle ran for governor from being Maui mayor, and Mayor Arakawa for a while was considering higher office, but it also tends to generate people who are a little bit more conservative than the other counties. Is that your observation?
Well, I think it's just a little more unpredictable. I mean, you also have people who are far more to the left. I mean, Kaniela Ing would be one of them. I mean, we have Ellie Cochran, who is, very much a progressive candidate. So I think there's just more variation. I mean, there's, I think, maybe more tolerance for slightly more conservative candidates, but also much more progressive candidates. I think recently, with people who are mobilized as a result of the GMO ban, that progressive community on Maui has been very active.
I think it's really interesting to see Mayor Arakawa turn his sights to the council. Because we saw that on Kauai with Joanne Yukimura, and now she's making a bid again for mayor as well. So.
It seems to be a small pool of
the musical chairs.
Yeah, although there will be fresh faces here and there. Harry Kim on the Big Island has been mayor twice now, so.
If he does that, I think he would be the first mayor to return to the council. I know he would be the first mayor to do that.
It's kind of a come down, right? It's like
I think so. I've never seen that happen before.
Do you think he's kind of a shoe-in though, given?
I think so. I think he has still quite a bit of campaign finance available, and the two candidates that as I recall, that have pulled papers or filed, they just don't have anywhere near as much name recognition as he does.
For the council seat. Do people on neighbor islands get more engaged with those local races? I always kind of feel like in Honolulu, it's like half the people don't even know who the council members are from the other councils. Is when you're in a smaller area like that, is it easier to get more engaged? Do you see the politicians more?
I think so. I think that the politicians are out in the community. They're approachable. I think Mayor Arakawa said that he can't go to the store without having people stop him while he's buying something.
Well, at least he goes to the store.
They need to have their pothole fixed or something like that. Yeah. So they are approachable. They go out to the community. So maybe that's why neighbor islanders, or at least Maui County, they have that kind of relationship with their county leaders.
What do you see, Catherine, when you watch county politics?
Well, it's funny because I came from Guam, which is very small. It's about the size of Molokai and a small population. And the politics is really kind of intense because you're related to half the island, and your cousin wants this and your brother wants that, and you have to really kind of draw the line. So there's those pressures, and I always thought like neighbor island politics was fascinating. Kauai politics with, Mayor Kunimura and just Elmer Carvalho. Those stories from way back when, just fascinating because it's small town politics.
Someone told me recently about an old story about Mayor Carvalho that before you could run for office, you actually had to have his approval to do so.
Yeah, I heard the same thing. Maui's a fascinating place. Kauai now, Joanne Yukimura running for mayor. What are your folks thought about that?
Mel Raposo is running as well. Derek Kawakami, who was in the legislature and then went back to be on council, and I would think those three names come to mind as well. That's another thing I would just point out, not living on the neighbor islands, being too Oahu-centric. Every time I do go, and I just got back from the Big Island visiting some family and friends, there seems to be much more calling your leaders by their first name. So on the Big Island, it's like Harry, everybody knows it's Harry Kim, or Billy, everybody knows it's Billy Kanoi. And it seems like it's just much more informal, because you do see him in the grocery store. That's nice.
Well, I noticed there were some council members on Kauai that did show up on camera during this recent, disaster over there. And these weather events really become real moments. I mean,
sure.
Mayor Carvalho was all over the Kauai coverage. He was standing there with Ige a lot, which I don't know whether he feels good about that. But we do cover the neighbor islands. We do pay attention.
Yeah.
So let's move on now to, I'm kind of losing track of this massive list of things. The state legislature. It seems like a lot of people are running, leaving the legislature, but is there really a chance of a shift over there of power at all, or is it pretty much going to be the same people holding office?
It's going to be more or less the same people. I mean, there's going to be a few new faces because some of these folks, for example, like Beth Fukumoto, are running for higher office, but for the most part, the leadership, I imagine, will stay intact. None of them have serious challengers. There's a few interesting open seats, like the Manoa seat, for example, but there's not many interesting legislative races that are happening. I mean, most of the incumbents who want to get reelected are going to get reelected without much trouble.
I did a check, and largely I would agree with you. There's 51 seats in the House. There are 12 that are open in the Senate, and I did a count, and I would say about probably 2/3 of them had the incumbent seeking an election. And mind you, it hasn't closed yet. The filing deadline's a couple more weeks. But I'm guessing nearly all of those people are going to be reelected. I don't see a major shift politically. I will say, however, that the Republican Party, speaking to the chair spoke to her party over the weekend and said they expect to field a lot of people, maybe as many as 50 people, and they're hopeful that maybe they could make a dent. But remember, there's no Republican in the state Senate right now that Sam Sloan's gone, and now there are only 4. Is it 4?
5.
5, thank you. Prophecy. 5 Republicans.
Well, it depends what time is it.
Yeah. So we'll see whether that can change. But as we all know, incumbency is the main determining factor to re-election in the legislature.
You do have a couple of folks in the House that are trying to play for the Senate.
Right. Jill Takuta's leaving for lieutenant governor. So you have Ken Ito and Jarrett Kahole is running as well.
Good job. I've watched that name every time I
Jarrett, I hope you're watching.
Yeah, and then Senator Sparrow leaving to run for lieutenant governor will also create a vacancy. I understand Matt Lopresti wants to run for that.
We'll see. I heard some talk that Lopresti may stick with the House seat because Rita Cabanella, his former opponent, is running, but we'll see. They've still got some time.
So he just doesn't want Cabanella to get in the House?
That has been a very competitive couple of races between them out there in West Oahu.
And then Donna Kim, people might thinking, what about Donna Kim's seat? Kalihi's on, but
no, Donna is not up.
She's not up. Yeah,
if she loses for Congress, she can stay there.
This is the virtue of being a senator, unlike a member of the House.
There's a lot of them have run routinely for Congress in their off years, and then they don't run when it actually.
Willis Sparrow did.
I was surprised that Senator Sparrow ran.
Sparrow will not only have to leave, but he will have to resign when he registers to formally run for lieutenant governor. It's the way the law works. That's not the case with Josh Green and Jill Takuta. But anyway, so we'll have another vacancy.
Which I pretty much blew by any discussion about Honolulu city politics. You guys see anything interesting happening there in particular? I mean, it's only council races.
Yeah, with Trevor Ozawa, he ran a very close race with Tommy Waters with 40-some votes, and so he's back at it again. And then you've got Natalie Iwasa, who's trying to make a play, and she's been showing up to all the HEART meetings, and all the council meetings.
East Honolulu, Waikai, Diamond Head, Waikiki. There's another race that's going to be interesting. Carol Fukunaga is up. Ikaika Hussey, a Native Hawaiian activist, who is challenging Carol Fukunaga. And there's one other race. Brendan Elefante, I believe, is up. Is that right?
And Ernie Martin's.
Ernie Martin. Thank you. Okay. Good.
Yeah, and we've got Bobby Bunda
wanting to come back.
Well recognized.
The old timers,
So that's going to be tough to overcome Bobby Bunda in a race like that. The council races, it's really hard, particularly when there's so many races. It becomes very retail.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you've seen some great examples of this. I mean, Stanley Chang was sort of legendary for winning that race, which the seat that now Trevor Ozawa occupies, for knocking on how many doors. I mean, he'd always brag about it, thousands of doors. But I think, you can make a difference. That retail politics, that the shoe leather politics can make a difference for those races if you're willing to put in the work. But so it's not always about money, because often you can't afford the ads and people aren't paying attention. So it's that personal connection that can make a difference.
One other politician who reminds me of this, Calvin Say was legendary for using up shoes walking around from his district. But those little house districts are much better for that. The council districts are huge.
Well, some say representatives say he doesn't even really live in his district, but that's a whole other story altogether.
Any old story.
Jumping ahead now to, I apologize for losing track of my list here. Yes, but if it's 8:39, it must be time for. The constitutional amendment. Now, this isn't a general election, and this question will be asked by the. There's a couple big questions that are going to be on the ballot. One is whether we should have a constitutional convention, and I actually worked at the last one we had, which was in 1978, and that was the last one we've had. There have been some agitation. The unions are already gearing up to fight that vote. Could you guys talk about that?
Well, remember, 78 may have worked, and of course, all sorts of things came out of that, including the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. But we did not have, it's every 10 years we are asked to do this. We did not have a con in 98, we did not have one in 2008. And this year, there are not only forces mobilizing against it, you mentioned the public sector unions primarily, they're worried about the collective bargaining and some other things. There are other groups advocating for it. And the real trick with the con is that blank votes count as no votes. And so you really have to get an education out there. I think most people have no idea what a con is. It's been 40 years, but I think there's going to be a lot more attention this year than there has been in recent elections.
I think some people might think the con's kind of like a colonoscopy. It's, probably good to have.
Something unpleasant.
But yeah, a little uncomfortable.
But the last one was a springboard for a lot of politicians.
Governor Waihee among them.
Jeremy Harris.
Yeah.
And you've got Native Hawaiian issues that are kind of wrapped in there too. So
Walter Reddy was involved. Auntie Frenchie DeSoto. It was
Leslie
really
Hara.
Carol Fukunaga.
Carol Fukunaga, yeah. So
So I agree that the public sector unions are going to be opponents because they're worried they're going to. I mean, the question is, are you going to lose more than you have right now?
One of the few states in the country where the privatization is against the Constitution.
Right. So as a member of a public sector union, I guess
declare
that's
your
good for
conflict
me.
of interest.
But one thing I will say is that there just does seem to be this kind of general malaise. I mean, there is this frustration and anger, I think, with local politics and the responsiveness of government. And so I think you might see that come out as support for the con. I mean, the same way that people sometimes vote for candidates like Donald Trump, the sense might be, we can't do worse. Let's see what can happen, and we'll give this a shot. Although the unions will be saying, the opposite. That
there are many people, though, that would argue that the last constitutional convention is kind of what led to the destruction of the Republican Party, the way it was structured, because they got rid of
multi-member districts,
right? So that ability to split the ticket in your district went away.
Yeah, but then again, you also had the rise of a Republican governor in Lina Lingle. You actually had more people in the House and Senate there for a while. So I don't know that I would say that. I do think a con is direct democracy. It's a way to bypass the legislature. And for those who have been frustrated to try and get things passed there, that's what a con could do.
Well, and I think one of the big issues that was an issue in the past is going to be the initiative and referendum system, which we don't have here, but a lot of folks have wanted.
We don't have it at the state level.
Right, we don't have it at the state level.
Another constitutional amendment, a constitution, but that will definitely be there, is one that was approved by the legislature, will be on the ballot. And it's, shall the legislature be authorized to establish, as provided by law, a surcharge on investment real property to be used to support public education. I'm wondering, Brian, have you seen a lot of support for this on Maui? Are people talking about it at all, the idea of property taxes being used for schools?
No, that's not something that that has come up.
Yeah, because what about you other folks? I mean, do you have concerns about this, just from a governmental standpoint, Colin?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that there's a lot that we don't exactly understand. I mean, about how this would affect a variety of different things. But I think that the question is, do people feel like they're already heavily taxed enough, or do they feel like our public education system is in such dire straits that the money could really help? I actually don't have a prediction for how this is going to go. I mean, usually you think of these as going down, but I could see HSTA and others making a really persuasive case for this.
I think the question is it good policy to have the state kind of, as one person put it, pick their pocket? Because real property tax is how the city and counties get their revenue, really. And I think it was I think Mike White, Maui County, and Big Island, Harry Kim, they weren't really thrilled with this idea. I think if you just take out education, because obviously education needs more money, but it could be something else. It could be, you want to buy a new skateboard or something. But is it good policy to have the state go in there and kind of tread where they never did before?
And by the way, if I'm not mistaken, it's on investment.
Exactly, that's an
It's
important
not.
point.
It says investment.
Yeah, it's not just your average folks and their home and so forth. I think the one concern a lot of people have expressed is, you already alluded to it, will the legislature be able to tap into the fund? Because the last thing you want to do is see more revenue coming in, because it's a very big target and very tempting to take that money. The most compelling argument for passage is that our teachers need more money, that we have a hard time retaining them here, and this would be a big incentive for them to stay.
So I got a letter, a caller who wanted me to list all the teachers that are running for office. And I'm not going to throw a lot of names out because it's not really fair for me to throw out the names, but this person points out that there's a lot of teachers running for office this year. Maui County, State House District 8, State House District 3, State House District 50, State House District 46, Maui County Council. Do you see this as sort of the teachers getting more activated associated with this?
I had heard this same thing, and I don't have the names in front of me. I know Matt Lopresti.
Amy Peruso.
Yeah, okay. So
Justin Huey.
Oh, so they're more. Yeah, I think that to me is exciting, to see a group of people who are already very busy and already dedicated and committed, deciding that they want to have further public service by going into politics. That's a nice idea.
And you see this trend on the mainland in West Virginia and Arizona. I mean, in those cases, the teachers are much more poorly paid, but mobilization, striking, I mean, maybe we are seeing a move to more teachers running for office.
I think a lot of people would think that's a good thing in Hawaii, given that, I mean, education funding has always been an issue here.
I would agree with them.
Okay, so I'm going to start hitting some viewer calls now, because we got to respect it. There's quite a number. Many in Hawaii don't vote because they feel their voices are not heard compared to those of moneyed interests on Bishop Street here and K Street in D.C. Also, state government leadership is very adverse to moving to the forefront of progressive reforms. Any response?
I don't think that was a question. I think
That's an argument.
Well,
I've heard that from many people. There certainly is some truth to it.
Do people think their vote counts? I mean, that's essentially what this is.
They don't. I think most people do not. And I wish that could change. I think there are people trying to change that.
Maybe that explains the low voter turnout.
Yeah. Well, that's how I think a lot of people feel. But then you do see politicians running for office. You do see 250,000 people voting. So at least we got something going on.
And there is a thought that the whole thing with the Women's March and then the gun issues in the school, that will mobilize people to get active in politics. The young votes and the female vote.
Yeah, somewhere in here there was a question about exactly that. Do we see more women candidates running? Is that movement getting to the point where people want to get involved in politics?
I know that's been true this year on the mainland. I don't know if we have more female candidates.
Well, remember, historically,
locally.
we're unusual. We have 3 members of our congressional delegation, female, just one male. We've had a female governor. We may have a second female governor, Colleen Hanabusa.
And a lot in the legislative leadership.
And several prominent female politicians running for the Congress and for lieutenant governor and other races. And I think proportionally the legislature is fairly well represented. It isn't 50-50 by any
30.
stretch. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
So a decent figure, certainly not anywhere where it should be, but that's better than the U.S. Senate, I think.
Good question. We kind of blew through this. What gives in Congress District 2? Colin,
Well, we could also.
You're the only guy
I'm
from CD2.
I'm CD2.
Good question.
What is Tulsi up to?
Huh? Tulsi Gabbard? She's strong. I don't know that there's someone mounting a serious challenge to her.
There usually is at least one candidate that runs on several issues.
And Sherry Campagna.
There is one in the Democratic Party running. It's going to be difficult. She's never run for office, not very well known, but she is seeking to be that alternative, inspired by the Women's March, as a matter of fact. She was key in organizing that. I don't see any Republican challenger. I'm with Brian on this one. I don't see Tulsi being vulnerable.
Okay. I'm not going to do this one. Sorry. Constitutional Convention. Any chance of Hawaii adopting the California nominating process given our one-party system? Oh, yeah, that's an interesting idea, right? The idea is that they just have a runoff. It's not really a two-party primary. It's a runoff.
That's right.
What kind of thing would, in
Jungle
California,
primary.
we were talking about it earlier, do you think that that would be the end of the Republican Party? Or?
Well, I mean, the Republican Party here is in pretty bad shape already. But it actually might be interesting because because this would generate a system where you'd still take the top 2 vote getters and move to the general election. And I actually think this might give, I think it would give progressive candidates a little bit of a better shot if we adopted something like this. But I don't really see that happening. I mean, the Democratic Party here, I can't see how that would be in their benefit at all to support something like that.
To make it easier for other people, not Democrats, to get in.
Exactly.
The question, what is the Democratic Party doing to cultivate fresh voices who can not just champion progressive issues, but actually get their ideas implemented into law? Is our legislature basically sort of a conservative, fairly conservative body?
I think they're a cautious body. I wouldn't say they're ideologically conservative, but I think they're cautious.
I wrote a column not long ago on how this last session I thought was unusually progressive. The idea that medical aid in dying passed after so many years where it didn't is really kind of remarkable. Banning pesticides in some cases, buffer zones around schools, oxybenzone, a chemical in sunscreen, bump stocks. There was quite a lot of bills. Critics will say not nearly enough, but when you look at, you mentioned is it kind of conservative? I think in the legislature, yeah. In many ways, the most liberal people in the legislature are people like Cynthia Thielen, who's a Republican, and she wants to have hemp legalized everywhere and very progressive on a lot of issues. It is fairly conservative. I do, however, back to the question, there are a lot of younger folks in the legislature, and I know the House in particular put a lot of those people in leadership positions. That's how Scott Saiki, in part, got elected Speaker, because he wanted to reward, and I'm talking more than a half dozen people coming in their 20s and their 30s and tired of sitting around and waiting for change.
Okay, so I do need to read this question because it's important in how we do this. Why is the panel not covering Republican candidates for governor? Especially, they mentioned Ray LaRue, who is a former deputy superintendent of schools, CEO of, I think, the Pacific War Memorials. He's running for the Republican nomination for governor. Why is the panel passing over Republicans when they're trying to make a difference? Do you think, again, programs like this, we did mention that there's a lot of candidates and that if people want to learn more, they could go, but there's a lot of people on these ballots. And do you feel it's appropriate for organizations to just focus on the top candidates?
Well, you only have so much time, and I mean, we try to focus, I think, on candidates who we think have a real chance of winning. But sometimes candidates surprise us, and I think that the one virtue these days is that virtually every candidate has a website, and so voters certainly can educate themselves and learn about their positions very easily. I mean, I looked at some of the candidates we didn't talk about who are not as well known, and they pretty much all have campaign websites that are pretty well designed and thought out.
And you have to stop and think, right? Because whoever thought that we would have had a Republican governor in a Democratic, very heavy, state? Who would have thought, like Bernard O'Connor on the Big Island would become the mayor? He was a neophyte, So. And who would have thought David Ige would become governor? There were lots of folks who were really surprised that didn't think he had a chance, but.
Well, Chad, do you think it has to do, though, so much with the fact that in order to run, you need a lot of money?
Well, you do. You mentioned Ray LaRue. We were looking over the candidate list, and one of my coworkers said, "Oh my gosh, I haven't seen that name in a while." And I think your viewer has a very good point. Should we be giving some more attention? And frankly, the media sometimes has to make a hard call. Who are you going to give time to? Are you really a legitimate candidate? Unfortunately, money is often used as the metric to determine whether you're or someone
viable.
we should seriously consider and being viable, and also name recognition. And if you're still active in the game, I do also feel that the viewer has a point about the Republicans. I tell you, if a few more Republicans won office, then I think people like us in the media would start paying more attention.
What should they be doing? I mean, it's sort of a catch-22. When they win, we'll pay attention. What should they be doing? What should the Republican Party be doing? I think that there's agreement, even among many Democrats that I've spoken to, that one of the weaknesses and one of the reasons for poor voter turnout is that we don't one-party dominance. What should the Republican Party be doing right now to overcome this, as opposed to just running people for office and hoping for free media?
Well, the infighting needs to stop, for one. I mean, they need to focus on winning elections and less on these ideological purity tests. And I think the folks who are elected in the legislature right now are pretty good at this. I mean, one thing I will give the Republicans in the legislature a lot of credit for is they've focused on issues like government transparency. They've been very good on those issues.
Financial accountability.
Financial accountability. Yeah. They were the ones who were most supportive of making sure that folks on commissions still had to reveal their financial information.
They would like to lift the general excise tax on food. I mean, what's that all about? So there are some compelling issues out there that are pocketbook issues that appeal, frankly, across party lines. It takes charismatic figures like an Andrea Topola, like a Beth Fukumoto, who's no longer a Republican, like a Linda Lingle, frankly, like a Charles DeJoux, who just left the Republican Party.
You got to stop hemorrhaging.
I got to throw one question out. We've only got about a minute left, and I think that this Republican Party issue is very interesting. But how would you answer those in the Republican Party that say the reason that the Republican Party is so weak is that the Republican people who are in office are too liberal?
I wouldn't say Bob McDermott is too liberal or Gene Ward. Some of them are. There's no question about that. I don't know. Remember what's going on nationally. We'll see what happens during the midterms. But the White House, Congress, arguably the Supreme Court, and a heavy majority of governorships and legislatures are controlled by the GOP.
Catherine?
We'll just see. I don't know.
What do you think they should be doing is my question.
I think the ones in the legislature are doing what they should be doing, but trying to.
How can people win office? Should they be out there going door to door in these districts?
Yeah, and they should be convincing them that they represent a different brand, that they're a check on the dominant Democrats. And that's how successful Republicans in the past, like Linda Lingle, have positioned themselves.
Well, we certainly wish them luck. Thanks very much to all of you and to all of you at home. Thanks for joining us tonight. And we thank our guests, Colin Moore, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, Catherine Cruz, Hawaii Public Radio, Chad Blair, columnist with Civil Beat, and Brian Perry, the city editor of the Maui News. Next week on Insights, one man's vision comes true to build permanent low-cost housing in a plantation-style setting for homeless working families on Oahu. Hear the story behind Kahauiki Village and meet the current resident and some of the individuals who made this happen. I'm Daryl Huff for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Ahui ho.